Good morning, everybody, and happy Thursday. Hopefully you guys are having a great Thursday today, and thank you so much for tuning in to another weather video. I was going to post something yesterday, but unfortunately my schedule has been very erratic, so I do apologize about that. But I will be getting out a video, obviously with this one today, and then we'll be putting one out tomorrow in relation to an update on the tropics. So be on the lookout for that. But I wanted to get this video out today to really talk about the severe weather threat that's going to be impacting portions of Michigan getting back into the Ohio Valley, where the threat exists today for damaging winds, large hail, and even the possibility of a couple of tornadoes. We'll be breaking all of that down in today's video, so you're going to want to stay tuned for that. But first, let's take a look here at the latest with our weather pattern. So we have our broad ridge of high pressure that continues to sit across the Midwest. By the way, for folks that were in Iowa, Missouri, getting back into Illinois and towards the Central Plains, we have seen some record-breaking heat indices. And I know from my neck of the woods, if you're in, say, northern Illinois, we saw heat indexes getting as high as 124 yesterday. And that heat is going to continue through the rest of the day today, where we can expect to see some similar heat indices, maybe slightly cooler in spots, but when I mean cooler, we're still going to be talking about the 110s at least in many spots across the Midwest getting back into the plains. So that continues to be the case today, and a lot of your jet flow, as we've talked about in the last couple of days, have been essentially riding over top of this hot air dome. And so your main jet flow has been predominantly in portions of the upper Midwest and getting back into Michigan and Ohio. Let's start first with the Four Corner states, where we've had an extensive period of showers and thunderstorms, and this is actually due to a couple of factors. The first one being the combination of Gulf Stream moisture as well as the Pacific jet, but you also remember have what was Tropical Storm Harold that has now been post-Tropical Storm Harold as it's moved to the Four Corner states. So all three of those factors combined, along with the fact that you're still in monsoonal season, have led to extensive flash flooding across much of this area. So we're going to continue to see showers and thunderstorms throughout today. If you're in the Four Corner states, you certainly have the risk of flash flooding through today and even getting into tomorrow. The other area that's been dealing with a lot of flooding concerns has been the exact same region that we're talking about for severe weather today, and that is the Ohio River Valley getting back into portions of eastern Michigan, where we saw training showers and thunderstorms persist across much of the region from last night. And as you can see here on the radar, we're still seeing that the case as much of these showers and storms continue to linger and train over the same areas that have been experiencing flooding. And again, as we mentioned at the top of this conversation, here's your area of showers and storms in relation to what was Tropical Storm Harold that continues to weaken and move through the Four Corner states of the USA. So we're going to be talking here about the severe weather predominantly for the Ohio Valley, and as I mentioned, portions of Michigan throughout today's video. If you do enjoy today's video, be sure to like, subscribe, share with family and friends who will be impacted by these weather events. And also, I just want to remind you guys that I will not be live streaming tonight the severe weather event. So in the event that we see a severe weather regional outbreak across Michigan and the Ohio Valley, I will not be streaming, but I certainly recommend that you check out some other streamers. I know Max Velocity does a wonderful job at covering these severe weather events, and WW116. I'll be sure to post these links in the comment below. I've heard that some of them will be streaming, so at least you can go watch them, and then they can provide you some coverage that I think will be very, very helpful to those that will be impacted and do a very good job at detailing this event when I'm not here to do it. And I'm not that great of a live streamer. I think they do a much better job than me, so be sure to check them out. I'll be sure to post that here in the description below. And with that being said, let's get right into the video. Okay, so we're going to begin by taking a look first at the 500 millibar jet. Remember, our 500 millibar jet is talking really about our jet stream level, the middle of the troposphere, if you will. And as you can see, this was taken as of this morning, early afternoon, and you can see this positively tilted shortwave trough that exists right over the Canadian prairies, getting back into Alberta and portions even of British Columbia. But as we talked about in the beginning of the video, you do have this very broad ridge of high pressure, this strong hot air dome that's essentially spinning clockwise moisture, that Gulf moisture, back into the portions of the lower Great Lakes and the Central Plains, which is why we are expected to see some very high heat indices today, once again for that region. But the focus, as we mentioned, is the severe weather, and we definitely have some strong winds aloft on the order of about 45 to 55 knots at this level. And of course, the other thing to mention too is, if you can notice, it might be very hard to see on this screen, but you do have a very small jet perturbation. And when I mean jet perturbation, we're talking about a very subtle shortwave feature that's currently present across the upper Great Lakes. And that's going to be the catalyst for the forcing later on this afternoon into the evening for portions of Michigan getting back to the Ohio Valley. You're going to see here in just a moment we have quite a bit of instability in terms of our thermodynamic profile, but the question really has been leading up to the event today is how these storms would initiate. Because remember, even if you have a lot of instability, you do need some sort of lifting and some forcing aloft. And we certainly do have that here, but the essential question still remains, are we going to have the capping inversion erode to where we would have convective initiation? Again, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we're going to talk about that here in a second. Let's now turn our attention to the 850 millibar jet, and this is what we refer to as the low-level jet, and a very interesting feature. Again, very similar with our upper-level ridge. You can easily see that transcend down to the surface with your high somewhere within this vicinity of the south central and central plains. And with that, because we have that clockwise flow, remember, we get this moist air advection to come up from the Gulf. And because of the strong winds aloft, you're actually getting that moisture to be steered all the way into the lower Great Lakes and back even towards the eastern Great Lakes. So as far as our moisture advection and our warm air advection regime is concerned, our warm air advection is coming from this hot air dome that we've been talking about for the last week. And then our moisture advection regime is subsequently coming from the moist air advection on the windward side of our ridge, or the western flank of our ridge of high pressure. And that's really going to help to provide a very moist boundary layer across, again, Michigan getting back into the Ohio Valley. Could even see some flash flooding once again. And you know, when you have a really strong moisture advection regime like this, you certainly are talking about the risk of flash flooding and even heavy downpours with some of these stronger storms. Before we take a look at the models as well as the Storm Prediction Center forecast, I want to turn your attention to this morning's sounding, and this was taken from Detroit back at 12Z, and the Storm Prediction Center actually highlighted this very sounding in one of their earlier outlooks, and I wanted to show it because it highlights something very important. Take a look here at the most unstable cape that's highlighted, 4,126. And this is measured in terms of joules per kilogram. Now, why that's important is because, keep in mind, this sounding was taken as of 12Z. This would have been probably right around 7, 8 a.m. Eastern in Detroit. And what that's telling us is, even as early as this morning, we have a very unstable atmosphere. You can even see that by your demarcation of your cape profile. Look how wide that cape tongue is. We like to call it in meteorology a cape tongue, and it's very broad. Look how large that is. That certainly is hinting at a lot of instability here in the atmosphere. And also take a look at your lapse rates. You have them anywhere between 6 to even 7 higher up. But notice that as of this morning, it was only at 3.4 between surface to about 700 millibars. Now keep in mind, our temperature this morning was saturated with our dew point at 69, but we do have this inversion that exists aloft. So once we start to mix out that inversion, that temperature is going to warm with time, and we're already seeing that at the time of this video. The big question, though, is going to be how much of this temperature inversion gets mixed out. We do have a lot of cloud cover in the area that is going to sort of inhibit some of that diurnal heating that can sneak in. But if we do get some clearing in spots, whether that be in Detroit or portions to the northwest of Michigan, central Michigan, maybe western Michigan, you may start to see sort of that cap start to erode. And when we have our cap erode, which is this warm layer aloft, that can help to initiate showers and thunderstorms very quickly. Now, here's my concern right off the bat. Of course, the question does remain with our cap inversion. How much of that is going to get mixed out? What is going to be the coverage of this initiation? That really remains to be seen, because we still do have some models that are showing very isolated convection, and then you have other models that are showing more widespread. But what I will say is on the mix layer, you do have 1600 CAPE as of this morning. I do expect that number to continue to increase as we go forward throughout the afternoon and as that heat dome continues to expand eastward. So that certainly would mean a very charged up mixed layer, which is really existent within this boundary. And so why that's important is because if we have a lot of mixed layer CAPE, that essentially means that we are going to have a ton of instability here. And really promoting more of that, mixing and creating more of these linear segments of storms. I know there's a risk for tornadoes, but I would say that later on tonight, you certainly are going to see the risk of some damaging winds and even some large hail due to these lapse rates. Let's take a look here at the Storm Prediction Center outlook. We do have a 30% chance significant risk of damaging winds from Detroit getting back into Grand Rapids and then even extending as far east as Erie, Pennsylvania today. This was just issued as of the time of this video. So the Storm Prediction Center has upgraded the outlook to enhanced. And this significant risk means that not only is there a chance of damaging winds, but there also is the chance of those winds being greater than, say, 70 to 75 miles per hour. By the way, if you hear my cat, he just came in, and we're just going to impromptu and keep going. If he meows, then it is what it is. Just want to let you guys know. Is we look at the hail risk. By the way, we also have a slight risk that exists up here towards the Dakotas, but today's main concern is really going to be back towards this area of the eastern Great Lakes. This is a slight chance for hail, 15%, mainly along areas of Michigan, with a 5% existent towards Ohio, back towards Erie, Pennsylvania. I would say that the lapse rates certainly will be steep enough to promote hail. It's all going to be dependent on what the storm mode is. As I mentioned before, if these storms do remain semi-discrete for a while, you can get the initial threat being hail. But once these storms grow upscale due to the very enhanced mixed layer CAPE that we're expecting, these storms will likely become more outflow dominant and really provide more of a damaging wind risk later on towards the evening. So the hail threat's going to be conditional, likely going to be in the first couple hours of the event. Could still see some quarter-size hail with some of these longer segments of storms, but like I said, 15% chance at the moment for that risk. And then finally, we do have a 5% tour that is existent for the area as well. And this is also going to encompass where we're expected to see some significant winds from Detroit getting back into Erie, Pennsylvania. And of course, I also have to mention there is a 2% chance of tornadoes for extreme northeastern portions of North Dakota, getting back up to the international border between Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Now, let's take a look here at the latest HRRR, and it pretty much sums up what type of convection we're expecting. There is an initial cluster of initiation back to the northwest of Detroit. You notice how quickly upscale that grows. And again, that's because you have a very strong profile of mixed layer CAPE, and when you have a lot of mixed layer CAPE, that really helps to promote bringing those winds down aloft and down towards the surface, and a lot of cold pooling. So the HRRR is certainly picking up on that thinking in developing sort of an MCS complex, this QLCS, a quasi-linear convective system that starts out in central Michigan and begins to move towards the southeast. And my main concern is going to be damaging winds. When you have a lot of this cold pooling going on, remember, cold air is very dense and definitely rushes out in front of storms. So we could see some redevelopment of thunderstorms. You also could see some bowing segments within this line that could produce some damaging winds in swaths, which is why the Storm Prediction Center has put out a 30% significant risk for damaging winds in this area. Now, the RAP is also agreeing with this, and keep in mind that the resolution of this convection is not as well defined as the HRRR, but at least in the short term, it is showing convection beginning right around this evening. So anytime between the 4 to 8 Eastern time frame is when we can expect these showers and thunderstorms to develop and eventually move off towards the southeast, cross into Ontario for extreme western portions of folks in Ontario, before then getting into Ohio and Erie, Pennsylvania, getting into the overnight hours. Same thing again with the RAP. We do expect initiation around that time frame. The HRRR also expects initiation to be anywhere between 4 to 8 o'clock as well. And also, I would say with the RAP and the HRRR, there are also other convective allowing models that are showing these storms growing upscale very quickly. There are also a couple, like the FV3, for example, that are not showing initiation at all. What I would say, though, is that I do expect there to be initiation later on today. There is a ton of instability, and you also do have a jet that is overriding on top of your hot air dome. and you can get these little jet perturbations that we've talked about earlier on this week, and I certainly expect that to happen. Just enough instability and just enough forcing aloft to create convective development and promote convergence at the surface. So again, there's a couple of models that aren't showing initiation. I would disagree with those, and I would actually side with the HRRR and the RAP and other convective allowing models that are showing development across central Michigan beginning around 4 to 8 Eastern, or within that time frame, and eventually moving south to east into portions of Ohio and Pennsylvania. Lastly, we're going to take a look here at the sounding, and I picked this because I think it drives home the point and encompasses a lot of the hazards we're expecting for today. And take a look at the sounding. Now, by the way, this is 0 UTC, so this is actually towards the evening hours of tonight where we do expect initiation. And take a look at your temperature. Remember this morning sounding in Detroit showing 69 degrees? Well, with enough diurnal heating, you get an 86 temperature and then a 79 dew point. That's going to lead to very high P-watt values, and the HRRR is picking up on very high amounts, anywhere between 2 to 2.2, and that pretty much coincides with other models as well. Very much confidence in that solution to where we have a very saturated environment. So any storms that do develop will certainly have the potential to produce some high rainfall rates at times and even some heavy downpours and possibly some flash flooding in spots. But if you look at the CAPE profile, take a look at this, right? Your most unstable CAPE around the evening is going to be 5,000, with your mixed layer CAPE also being near 5,000. So that is a ton of instability. If you were to draw a statistical distribution, this is way to the extreme of a thermodynamic profile. So this is definitely above normal for a typical severe weather event to see mixed layer CAPE that high. Usually we might see mixed layer CAPE anywhere between, I don't know, 1,000 to maybe 2,000 at most, or 2,500. But seeing 5,000 certainly is unprecedented, and that speaks to how unstable the environment is. Now keep in mind, you do still have some capping inversions to deal with just at the surface as well as the mixed layer, although it's not as strong as what we saw this morning. So if this model was to pan out, even with a capping inversion like this, you certainly do have enough of a cap erosion to get initiation, whether it be in Detroit or points in the northwest. And by the way, I do have to correct myself. I mentioned this is the HRRR. This is actually the NAM from this morning, right around 12Z. The other thing I want to mention too is take a look at your hodograph. You do have some pretty nice low-level veering that exists before you have a lot of backed flow just above your 850, so where your low-level jet would be. And so there definitely is the threat of tornadoes. I would say that there is going to be an isolated threat for tornadoes, maybe a couple to look out for, or potential for a couple of tornadoes. But like I said, I think my main concern as a forecaster for folks in this region is certainly going to be the damaging winds later on tonight, which could exceed 75 miles per hour depending on the evolution. I certainly would put my odds on that as middle to high on that chance. And then also damaging hail too with some of those initial cells. But if we do get any of these storms to rotate, which they can because you have very strong low-level veering, that certainly does present the risk of a couple of tornadoes in spots, and that threat would be rather isolated. The more widespread threat is going to be the damaging winds beginning later on this afternoon and getting into the late evening. I also want to finally highlight too, you do have enough low-level shear as well as that, sort of not just the speed shear, but the veering as you move with height to produce an isolated tornado threat. So 23 knots, 38 knots from surface to 3, that's certainly more than enough surface to 3 kilometer shear to get some tornadic development. I would expect though, again, just to emphasize this point, that if we do get any tornadic development or any rotations, it's going to be confined within this MCS or QLCS complex we can expect later on tonight. The threat of discrete supercells, I would say, is rather low. Again, due to the highly unstable environment and very saturated environment, these storms are going to want to grow upscale very quickly. So the window of opportunity for any supercells today remains very shallow, and the threat of that remains very low. So therefore, I would expect any rotations to be confined within more of a larger complex of storms. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share with family and friends. And also, as I said at the top of the video, I will be sure to share some links with you guys for some YouTubers who I expect to be streaming later on tonight. And they will certainly provide some quality content and keep you guys informed on the latest with this severe threat later on this evening. Hopefully you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow with another brand new video.